Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Andy Engel, and welcome to When Friendship Fails, Who Shows Up for Us on the Holidays? I lead virtual public programs here at Reimagine. My colleague, Trina Williams, is also here helping out on this Zoom call. For some of us, when the decorations go up and the music starts playing in stores and malls, it can be a time of cheer and excitement, but it also can be dreadful because we're thinking about friends who are no longer connected to us. Maybe they were regulars at the annual Friendsgiving. Maybe they weren't there when we needed them most. And maybe we didn't show up for them. I am so grateful that Gina Moffa and Katherine Sleadd are back for part two of this conversation on grieving friendships. For those who may not be able to see me, I'll just give you a quick visual description. I am a white cisgender male with glasses, salt and pepper hair. I'm wearing this brand new orange sweater vest, and I have a matching orange wall behind me. And a bit about Reimagine for those who may not know. Reimagine is a nonprofit organization catalyzing a uniquely powerful community. People of different backgrounds, different ages, different races, different sexual orientations, gender identities, and faiths, also people of no faith, all coming together to face adversity, loss, and mortality. We support each other to transform life's biggest challenges into action and growth. Reimagine resources, support groups, events like this one today are free, sliding scale, and accessible. This is made possible by the support and generosity of participants like you. So for those who already made a tax-deductible donation when you registered for this, thank you so much. Your gift will immediately support Reimagine's mission to help people of all walks of life transform the hard stuff into purpose and meaning. Before we get going, just a few Zoom tips. For those who wish, you can click on the CC icon to get a live transcript of what's being said. If you'd like to see the full transcript, click on that CC icon and select the View Full Transcript option. You can also save and download the chat by clicking on the three dots within that chat window. Feel free to send me a private message or Trina a private message during this event. If you're having any problems, we might be able to help you. We are recording this, so everyone who has registered will get the playback. There will also be a follow-up email with information about our guest speakers and other resources. Okay. Briefly, I want to let you know about other events this month focusing on holiday grief. We'll paste links in the chat for you. On December 19th, we have Room for Grief, the Winter Holiday Edition. It's our monthly drop-in on the third Thursday of every month, offering peer-led support groups. Raina Halpern will facilitate. And on December 22nd, for those of you who are grieving parents or no grieving parents, we have the Peregrine Lodge, a virtual retreat hosted by the Lost Travelers Club. So please check those out. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that our guests, Gina and Katherine, will be in dialogue for about 45 minutes. We'll take your questions. So if something sparks an idea or a question during their conversation, please put that in the chat. I'm going to field those to Gina and Kat as we go along. And for those who missed part one of When Friendship Fails, we're going to paste a link in the chat for that, so you can take a look at that at another time. And now a few words about our wonderful speakers. Gina Moffa is a licensed clinical social worker in private practice in New York City. In the field for over 20 years, Gina has helped thousands of people seeking treatment for grief and trauma, and her focus is on emerging adults. She wrote the book Moving On Doesn't Mean Letting Go, A Modern Guide to Navigating Loss. And Gina is currently working on a new book that focuses on friendship loss. Katherine Sleadd is the author of How to Be a Bad Friend, a book about the complexity of friendships and the heartache of friend breakups. Kat holds a master's degree in counseling psychology with a concentration in trauma and abuse and is a licensed therapist based in Colorado. I'm going to kick this off to the two of you. Going to spotlight you because you deserve that spotlight. And we were talking about this before the call began, and I'm just curious, maybe you can share with others maybe what your plans are for the holidays.
Yeah. Do you want to go
Totally.
first, Gina?
Yeah, let's start with me because mine is sad. No. First of all, hello, everybody. It's so good to be back here again with everybody. It feels like it's been so long, but it's been the summer. Kat and I loved being here the first time to talk
Mhm.
about friendship loss and all of the little parts that come up in our lives regarding friends. And so we're happy to be back. I'm speaking for both of
Mhm.
us. Yeah, I think the holidays are just so naturally the thing to, everybody is looking forward to things. There's so much togetherness, and I think that it illuminates everything that we just don't have and
Mm.
everything that's missing. And, I lost my mom 8 years ago, as of 2 days ago. And every tradition and everything has sort of ended with her. And so I really count and have counted on friends and friendship to sort of be a soft landing for me during these times. And I've been on both ends of friendship loss, and the holidays really can point out the things that are missing and all of that. And so I'm just happy that we're able to be here. This year I will be traveling to Colorado to be with friends for the holiday and friends who are chosen family. And I'm incredibly grateful because it could be lonely to sit on the couch alone. So
Mhm.
I'm grateful for that this year. How about you, Kat?
Yeah, I just echo everything you say. Like holidays, I have like what my friend and I refer to as the big sads. I don't know if anyone else, like I try to give a name for it because I'm like, what's wrong with me? Why is all this grief coming up? So grief is definitely a companion in the holidays. And I
Yeah.
also don't have family either for different reasons. And so chosen family has become important, but then also have lost that chosen family as well and had to find new chosen family again. So lots of ups and downs in the holidays, and trying to find your people is a tough thing, and when you're alone it's really really extra lonely. So yeah.
Really is. And I think, when Kat and I were talking about this, how to come back and how to bring in the holidays, a lot of it was really tricky because some of you are probably here for different reasons, right? Maybe you've lost other people and, friends haven't shown up for you during this time. Or, maybe you are lonely during the holidays. We are in a really big, as you all know, loneliness epidemic, and we can talk about it intellectually, but nobody's really being helped and nobody's really being reached. And so it's for me the idea that Kat and I can come together with Andy and Trina and Brad and everyone at Reimagine and provide a space to talk about the fact that not having friends or having friendships fail or not having closure around friendships that have ended brings up so much shame and so much loneliness and so many confusing feelings that I think it's so wonderful that we can at least provide a space where we can talk about it here. Um,
Hmm.
just to at least be here together and say, whatever you're feeling is normal. We're all in this together.
Hmm. Yeah. And for those of you that were with part two, we talked a lot about the ideas of losing friends. What does that mean as like a process for us in our stories and feelings? And we got a lot of requests for things to be practical. What are the how-tos? What is a way that you can manage when you don't have the people that you used to be with to help you manage your life? So I think part of our framing, as Gina and I were talking, is if there are folks in the audience, when we talk about friend breakups, we're talking about people who've gotten broken up with or people who are maybe contemplating needing to end a friendship. So, with that, what we have to offer you will likely feel resonant if you are on the side of maybe contemplating a friend breakup. You're in a lot of pain and unknown and uncertainty space as you feel those things. And if you're on the other side of being blindsided and the betrayal or just the even coming back around to another anniversary of grief, of losing a friend, and being able to process that. So some of these how-tos are going to hopefully be supportive to you, regardless of what situation you are in. So I want to note we will have a journal prompt in the middle of our conversation for you guys to have some time to reflect. So if you don't have something to write with, maybe go grab a pen, a journal, piece of paper. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. So just a
And
heads
if
up
you
for
can't
that.
do it, yeah, if you
Yeah.
can't do it, it's okay to just sit with your thoughts too. A lot of this is really just reflecting upon who we are with friends, who we are without our friends, how we're feeling about ourselves when friendships go awry. I think it's a very complicated thing because friendships, a lot of the time, are more intimate at times than our own romantic relationships, especially for women. I do find that, I don't know, anybody here find that you're more, um, you're closer with your friends than some of the other people in your life. And so when that goes wrong, and you're remember when, right? For people who have friendships that are over 50 years old and they somehow end or we lose them in some way, you're losing a piece of your history and you're losing a piece
Hmm.
of your memory, and the people that remember with us. And I think it's important to know that like there's so much grief there, that really just deserves to be acknowledged. And when we lose a friend, it also comes with layers, right? If we have a friend group, things are different. When you have mutual friends, things change. And people don't really understand that. So we have not just our friendship loss, but we have these secondary losses that come with our friendship loss. All the things that represents, our own identity with our friendships and within our friendship group. And I think that one thing that feels the most important to me is really just to acknowledge that grief and to acknowledge that losing a friend is not just losing a friend, but it's losing a lot more things, and it has a lot of ripple effects that sometimes we don't see right away because we're in the midst of that deep loss. Um,
Hmm.
so part of the stuff
Hmm.
that we wanted to do is really help people to reflect on that. So Catherine had
Yeah.
a great writing exercise, to add to that.
Yeah.
So that's a very long explanation of why I think it's good for us to do it.
I think that's beautiful. I mean, Gina, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, as we're here with the holidays, how rituals are involved with that. And the question for you in the audience to begin to notice, what are your rituals? Maybe there are things that you do not want. Maybe there are things that you don't know how to symbolize. But could you talk, Gina, about rituals and grief, just as a general idea with the holidays and then maybe friendships?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I find important is really how do we look at rituals now that we're grieving? And, rituals usually bring us closer, right? The idea of traditions. And we decide when we're in the midst of loss, and this could be a family member, this could be a friend, whomever we're having a tradition with or we're having our rituals, they really are a way to continue on. But when we're grieving, I think it's a really important thing to ask, what are my priorities if I'm
Mm,
going to fulfill a ritual, right? Because I think that we think that rituals are obligated. We're obligated to continue things. We're obligated to keep up the identity that we always have. We're obligated to cook that dinner or bring this casserole or send out these cards, these family cards. And when we go through loss, all of that gets tossed up in the air. And
mm,
I think we really struggle with the idea of what do we keep? What can we do right now, especially if a grief is very fresh? There's so many expectations that we just sort of continue on. And, I'm a grief therapist, so I work with grief every single day. And the expectations from society and the fact that we are such a grief illiterate society in general, who really, we don't know how to grieve and we don't know how to support grievers. So when we're in the midst of a holiday or we're trying to figure out how do we both move forward and hold on, and what do we hold on to, can be really disorienting for so many people. So when it comes to rituals, I think for me, I'm like, what feels good? What
mm,
feels good right where you are now? It doesn't have to be forever. It can be just for right now. And our rituals, we think of them as so finite and so, so strong, and they must be absolute. But the truth is we get to decide. We get to captain our ship of grief. And so if there's something that feels good to you, whether that's honoring, sending out cards or cooking and baking brownies like you always do, if that feels good, great. If you're in the midst of a deep loss and nothing feels good, our job is to just figure out what feels good or with whom being around feels good. So
Mhm.
I guess I'm not so tied to rituals being what they always were, especially in the
Mm,
midst of grief.
mhm,
So I think I'm reading something in the comments, taking it day by day and doing as little as possible as you approach the first anniversary. I think it's really important, even talking about adding that into rituals, is being able to just do a little bit at a time, one step at a time. And no matter what it is that we're talking about, whether it's friendship loss or dealing with friendship lost in the midst of our own losses, is a
mhm,
really check in with ourselves and be as tender as possible with what you think is expected of you.
mm.
Because I'm going to call
Yeah.
BS on that.
Snaps. I
Sorry,
love
Kat.
the highlight. No, I'm like snaps. That's so good. Why sorry. I think you're highlighting the sense of how we can feel obligated in ritual, and I feel that's so important, especially when there's pressure, or maybe even obligated to ourselves in grief to like move faster than we actually are able to. And that's reminding
Yeah.
me of how we were chatting about the way that we look at these how-tos, because how to grieve, if whoever has the answer to that question is a like not experiencing the full humanity of things, and it's like that's a question that we're meant to answer together and discover. But our minds, when we think about wanting to cope in grief and to move forward, we want to think about this idea of how can we regulate our nervous system. What are practical ways we can do that? And also, like, how can we have a new mind around something where the brain pathway that we used to have that would go to the friend, like you're talking about, Gina, with the loss of the memory, how do we allow that to be honored and then redirected or to then heal so it doesn't put us in that loop spiral? And there's a fancy
Mhm.
word that therapists use called mentalization, which is not intellectualizing. It's not moving into our brain to like think it all through, but it's about how can we become more creative in our ways of thinking by noticing the grief as it's coming up, if that makes sense to you all. And I'm thinking about
Mhm.
rituals, Gina, I like on the other side too of how can we get really creative with them. I love to set shit on fire. I like if you
Ooh.
have something that is like just safely. So just to say, but if you have something that you want to release, to let go of, to even write things down, and to put it in the fireplace, and let it be something that's put in a candle into a bowl, or throwing rocks into bodies of water. Where is the symbol of, if you do need to let go, or if there is something you're holding, like this idea of your friend calling you toxic or unhealthy, what do you need to release and let go of? And how can you get so creative with that and maybe begin to notice as your mind starts to get triggered into that grief spiral, like, what would be a way that this could be symbolized? And so that doesn't give you maybe a one, two, three exactly for your situation, but there is an
Mhm.
invitation, I think, to creativity in our grief, as you're saying, especially when we slow down, like you're pointing out, Gina.
Totally. I love the idea of creativity. So thank you for saying that. I think that we have permission when we're going through any kind of loss to do things our own way and to do whatever feels comfortable for us. I think that so many of us get caught up in like what we think is right or wrong. So I like the idea of how do we take care of ourselves while we're grieving? How do we, if we're talking about rituals in general, which I think is hard if it's talking about a friendship breakup sometimes, because I think that,
Mm-hmm,
I think that rituals with friends are usually memory making
mm-hmm,
activities or, moments of connection with our friends. And when people don't show up or we don't have dear friends, I think the idea that we're left to create our own rituals for ourselves, to take care of ourselves, to feel connected again, can be hard
mm-hmm.
to do in the beginning, but incredibly helpful. So I like the idea of being creative in some way. I think I read in the chat, which forgive me, guys, because I was telling everybody earlier, I'm not great at talking and reading at the same time. It's like a new thing I thought see about myself. So if I miss things, forgive me. But I saw somebody said they just got a tree, a small tree, and decorated it with earrings, which I think is so cool, and so creative and so unique. But I think stuff like that, right? Like, what are we feeling right now? You're all here to talk about friendships failing. And I think the key part of that is feeling disconnected, feeling lonely, feeling isolated, not knowing always what to do with that. And I think that's why we come together and we try to find ways to cope, and we try to find ways to move forward that feel okay and less lonely. Um, but it's really hard,
Hmm.
especially with friendships, because we don't have anything really. Talk about rituals. I think that sometimes a ritual would be a goodbye ritual, a
Hmm.
closure ritual, just like you were talking about, whether it's setting things on fire. I like writing goodbye letters.
Hmm.
Um, I don't
Hmm.
send it, but I'll put it in my notebook and I will write different versions of my goodbye letter. Sometimes it's angry, sometimes it's sad, sometimes it's talking about the good memories that we had together. Sometimes it's honoring my part in something that didn't maybe work out, and I think that it can be incredibly healing. Um, and I know it sounds a little nutty. I'm writing 5 different letters to somebody that's no longer in my life. But I think that, if we're looking at how multifaceted grief can be, whether we're grieving the loss of a loved one, where there's a finite death, or the loss of a friendship where it's more of an ambiguous loss because they go on and we get to sort of witness them out in the world if we're still friends on social media or we hear about them through mutual friends. But I think that kind of loss can be really, really sometimes more painful. And so
Hmm.
there's so many different layers to it. So in a way, I'm like, well, sometimes I'll be mad at them, and sometimes I'll miss them, and sometimes I'll think, oh, I have nobody else who remembers this with me. They were the witness to this one moment or this trip.
Hmm.
And, then there's that. And then I'll think, wow, I could have said that differently. Maybe that hurt them too. And so it's
Hmm.
really kind of looking at the whole relationship all over again. And it can be painful, but it can also bring some peace because I think that we get to clarify the whole relationship as a whole. That I think we sometimes don't do when we're in the midst of really big feelings, especially around the holidays, because we're already feeling so sad and so overwhelmed, probably.
Hmm. Yeah. I just saw something in the chat that I do talk fast, Susan. It is so true. I need to slow down.
What
As I'm
happened?
saying, slow down. Someone asked for me to define a word again. And so I'm
Oh,
talking fast. So I'm going to slow down. If I can circle back to that, because I think it relates to
hmm
kind of the next thing we wanted to touch on. Mentalization is essentially how we're forming a mind around something. And what does that mean? It means that we're not getting motivated into this action step, and we're like essentially moving quickly with our thoughts to go, here's how I'm going to solve a problem. We're beginning to kind of lean back into the scope of what's going on, the different angles, maybe questioning what we're believing about ourselves or the other person in a situation, and maybe essentially bringing curiosity rather than judgment to whatever it is that we're dealing with. How do we begin to have an angle around something? If you've ever, in reference, like phone somebody when you were kind of feeling panicked and they were able to sort of talk you off a ledge and help you get some perspective, that would be an experience of having someone like mentalize something for you. So hopefully
Mm,
that's a slower explanation. And to tie it back into our practicality, like how do we get more clear? We were talking about, crisis work, Gina, and like how just are you aware of the emotions you have around this
yeah.
friendship loss? Or the triggers. I remember I couldn't see certain make and models of vehicles. I would begin to like, my breath would get really fast, my heart would start beating fast. So, what little nuances, what are the reminders? Maybe you see the decorations. I saw someone who said that that ritual is a grief space for them now. Can you honor that, like, wow, when I see Christmas decorations or friends out shopping, I'm probably going to feel triggered. I'm going to feel, what are you going to feel? Yeah, do you have more to add to those, like just bringing it really into the simple awareness of those things, for folks?
I want to say yes, but I was sitting here reading the comments. Um,
Mhm. Cool. Read the
this
comments
is
then. Yeah. What do we see?
I was talking of I was reading about Well, I was reading, Carol, thank you for that. I was reading about somebody who was teaching a class and talking about the brain and how relationships sort of live on in the brain. I don't know
Mhm.
now who it was because it kept moving. Um, but I was just thinking about that so much. There's a book that I love, and my dear friend Mary Frances O'Connor wrote The Grieving Brain. If you haven't read it, I really recommend it. It's remarkable. She's a remarkable person, intelligent, kind, sweet, all the things that you would want somebody working with grief to be. But if I could segue on that, just because I'm having a moment of not being able to go back for a moment, if you don't mind, Kat, we can go back. But
Yeah.
really, I wanted to talk about what somebody was talking about because it's really true. And the thing about people in our lives that can make this so traumatizing and so hard is that in our brains and in our nervous system, we have our brains really, really love predictability. And and it loves that people are where they are predicted to be, right? If you have your best friend who is in the town next door and you talk every Friday, your brain comes to expect that. And when we don't have that relationship anymore, or when if they die or if they aren't in your life anymore, the brain now has two jobs to do. It has to figure out how to disconnect from the fact that that person is no longer in the predictable place in your life. And it has to also then reconnect to a relationship in some place in space and time. Because the relationship, despite the fact that it may be over in terms of friendship, it still continues on in your mind and the relationship is still there. We don't just cut people off and we never think about them ever again. Although, if that is the thing, like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, I think that movie was about erasing people.
Mhm.
But if we're talking about, death-related losses, our brain has a lot to do, and that's why it can be so traumatizing because we have to both detach from where we know that person to be and also reattach to a relationship with them with the idea that they're somewhere in space and time. And
Mhm.
that is really what makes loss in general so painful, so unpredictable, why there's no five stages of grief, why that's a myth, and why we kind of cycle through very non-linear ways of grieving because people come back around. The relationship is not always just gone. And so
Mhm.
I was reminded of that whole topic that I just gave you while I was reading one of the comments. So forgive me for totally segueing.
No,
Uh,
it's a
but it
really
was an
important
important comment.
reminder. Yeah, it is
Yeah, and I
because
think
we're, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, 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 go. I've I interrupted you enough.
I don't remember. We were in a little back and forth, so but I don't remember where we were, but I think that you're noticing like how much your mind is doing like on like extra work where you used to have that relief, a placeholder for, oh, I can talk about this, which reminds me of how if you do see family for the holidays, and if that is challenging as it is for so many of us, and then you've lost the friend that you might have otherwise processed that with, your brain is going to be in overdrive and you might feel tired or anxious and not know why. And so it's like, how can you begin to bring more awareness to what you've lost and what it feels like to lose that, rather than asking
Yeah.
yourself to do anything? Yeah, yeah.
No,
So
that's really well said.
yeah, so vulnerable and so painful to do. Um, Yeah, it's a lot of things to talk about. And even as we're maybe talking fast, it's kind of like how our minds are working fast around friendship and friend breakups. Do you want to shift? Should we do the little journal prompt? Should we try that?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, you take it
This is a
over.
slow down. Well, along this line of how can we be practical, if writing is helpful for you, we know from Julia Cameron and The Artist's Way and many other things that longhand actually does a lot for our minds. And so this is this idea that we want to be able to transform rumination, so thinking that same loop over and over again as losing a friend can do in our heads, into self-inquiry, to compassionate self-inquiry. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And one of the ways could be writing. So If you have your pen and pencil, and I might unpin you, Gina, just so I can see everybody, but I'm not sure if I can do that quickly. Okay. If you have something to write with, this is a Zen writing practice of a style that I learned from another author named Mirabai Starr. The questions are my own, but if you take a moment, we're going to do what will not be long enough. So 2 minutes of time, 2.5 minutes for each prompt. And you're going to get two prompts, but you won't know what the second one is until I tell it to you after you've done the first. So find a comfortable way of being for yourself. If you feel we've been talking quickly, I know I sure have. So maybe honor the fact that just sort of rushing. Take a moment to settle in. And here is your first prompt. I want you to think of the friend breakup that you want to tend to right now. Want to think of yourself in the moment where you were considering that breakup, where you found the news of that breakup. Perhaps at the specific moment that you recall in your body, and whatever comes to mind is the best one. And go ahead, write a brief letter to that version of you, the version of you that was broken up with, the version of you that lost that friendship. When you're ready, put your pencil down for the second prompt. And that is now to write a letter from that moment, from that version of yourself to you right now. So the self that you just wrote to, the memory you just wrote to, write a letter from that moment to you in this present moment. Whenever you finish that sentence, go ahead and set your pen down. And notice if it's something you want to return to. Maybe give a mental note of a promise to yourself of when you will choose to return to that space, and a promise that you can keep.
And I think what can be really helpful here is if you do want to start doing some letters, some goodbye letters, it's a good place to sort of start because now you're really kind of honing in on hopefully some truer, deeper feelings that maybe are just looking to be seen and witnessed and given the time of day.
Mhm. When we talk about friend breakups, the reason that I find this to be a helpful practice is sometimes we can make assumptions about our grieving self. Um, I think that we can even pity ourselves. I don't know anyone here that enjoys being pitied. I think it's an undignifying thing. It's not actually the same as someone being with us in our grief, but sometimes we can unintentionally have a reflection on ourselves and our own suffering that does not actually recognize the power and the dignity and the strength of how we are showing up to life, even in the face of losing a friendship. So I noticed there may have been some confusion on that, and sometimes it can be confusing, and it is okay. However, you wrote it, can you trust that that was what you needed? And maybe put in the chat what that was like for you, if it was confusing, a single emotion word, frustrating, if it was helpful. Anytime that we do something mindful, we want to invite ourselves to the question of do I feel good? Do I feel worse? Do I feel the same? Was this helpful? Was this unhelpful? So that we're being honest about what our experience was, because that's the most important thing. Cool. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah. hmm Feels bad. Okay. hmm Your anger rose as you wrote more. It shows where you need healing. And what a courageous thing to do then, to recognize, clarifying. Remember, good things, bad is also true. Raw. Yes. hmm hmm Confusion. And I want to notice something about confusion. It's one of actually, I think, one of our more important emotions. Brave. I realize how brave and
Oh,
beautiful I am as a friend. Prudence.
I love that.
Stunning.
Talk
Stunning. And I
about
hope, no,
self-love.
go ahead. Yeah. Well, I was
No,
going to
no,
say,
no.
take a moment to read each other's responses. because right now what we have is a beautiful community of all of the emotions that we've likely all felt at some point or are feeling in the loss of a friend breakup. So maybe you do not feel confused in this moment, but maybe as you see others name confusion, there can be more room for your confusion.
Mhm.
I don't know if I finished what I was saying. Confusion protects us from the things that aren't safe for us to know. I'll say that again. Confusion protects us from the things that aren't safe for us to know. So if it is a difficult emotion to feel, it often has a lot of physiology. Like people can feel vertigo when they feel confusion, other things. So I just want to note that.
And if
Um,
you don't feel
yeah.
anything at all, like
Mm-hmm.
this isn't a practice that should have any judgment whatsoever. If it didn't
Mm-hmm.
feel good, or if it brought up things that you feel ashamed of, or things that just feel frustrating, or not closed, it's all okay. I think it's all I'm in the business of therapy, so I like things to come to the surface, to be witnessed with compassion and not judgment. But that said, is it going to happen in 20 minutes? No, but I think that it's a great starting point. If there is somebody else that you feel safe with, or more letter writing, it's a really good jumping off point to say, where is it that I may need more support? Where is it that I may need to really let out these feelings? Maybe this prompted you to write a letter to them in real life. Maybe it prompted you to talk to someone else about it. And I think that's sort of, for me, it's the idea that we can bring something to the surface is really where the healing can begin.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I
Yep.
just want to make sure that everybody is coming to this with some kind of compassion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's easy to get stuck in a place of judgment, or, frustration, or any of that. And it's all welcome.
Yeah. And that's like the place of how do we
Mhm.
transform that rumination into compassionate self-inquiry? Because we used to have our friends help us learn how to be kind to ourselves. That is likely part of what the friendship that you had, that's part of what you lost.
Yeah.
So finding it yourself. I you know, want to say that, you know, Gina, you're offering something I feel that's kind of related to this. Do you want to chat about that briefly now, or what your groups?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm working on this in a lot of ways, and I have a friendship survey if anybody is interested in helping me do some research for my own next book to talk about your experience. It's all confidential and all of that. But in understanding that, I do think that we need some extra um, soft places to land in this. I think,
Mm-hmm.
I am doing a friendship loss support group soon, but we can talk about that another time, or talk about it later, just to create a sense of,
Mm-hmm.
we're all in this together still, and that this doesn't have to be something that you go through alone. I think it's one of the
Mm-hmm.
things about friendship loss is it feels so much more complicated than other types of losses. And we're in the good vibes only era, where everybody just wants to feel good, or they've shut things out, or they cancel other people. And um I think it can be really, really um, hard for us. And I think that all we do is push away the hurt and the anger. And so many of us, I mean, I'm just looking at your faces, but I can, in the people that I can see, and the people who are commenting, I just feel like you're probably the people who are so sensitive and so loving and so giving and so compassionate. And I wonder if some of the grief is that you don't always get that back, and you don't always get that back in return, and it can be something that sort of ripples off into life, which is like, this feels like this happens a lot. And and what do I do differently? How do I change that? Or how do I live in the world with this open heart, where I feel like sometimes it's not, the heart and the love is not brought back to me, and I feel lonely within relationships, but because I don't want to not have friendships, right? It's I can sort of take what I can get. part of
Hmm.
it. And I think that that's a really important part of talking about friendship loss too, because even if you're in friendships, but they are not always giving you back what you feel you give, or the kind of love or commitment or dedication. And I think it's not for lack of trying. I mean, I obviously don't know people, but I think that it can be equally painful. So I don't have my survey up here because I forgot that I was going to ask you if you wanted to participate. It's like 30 questions, but it does ask your own kind of experiences with friendship and friendship loss. And it's on my website. I'll put it here at some point when I'm back to reading the comments. But I would love if you can share. Oh yeah, I could. Oh right, the link can be in the email. That would be great. Because I think that, everybody has so many different stories within friendship and friendship loss, and the ways in which we were raised and the ways in which we were sometimes taught to accept behavior from other people. All of this plays a really big part in how we show up in the world and what we accept in the world and how we feel about ourselves in relationship. And I think it's really important to know that, but also as a way to honor ourselves in a way that we probably don't always do. So
Hmm.
part of that is happening. But yeah, so I created a 3 week, just a very quick 3 week, although it has room to shift and grow, a support group that's coming on in first week of February. If anybody is interested, it'll also be on my website later on. But really, I think this particular journal prompt was really helpful because I think that despite it being frustrating for some or hard for others, I think that it brings up kind of where we are with ourselves and how we're feeling in our own skin too, and how we can continue on when it feels really hard.
Yeah, totally. And that's where, we're kind of rounding out to where we've got some questions, time
Oh,
for
yeah.
questions. I want to note though something like we're in a cultural moment right now with the movie Wicked. So many things to say about that on the systems level and then also interpersonal level. But if you do not believe, in case you don't, that your friend breakup story so deeply matters, here is a movie that has captured the world and a story that has long before captured the world that does center around the power and the significance of a friendship and the breaking of and the loss of the friendship and the harm that is done within that friendship, on so many layers of things. So I think honoring your friendship story and being curious about it, while that doesn't give you a practical one, two, three step, it's a whole world within you that is there for exploring, and to know. And I think that's, again, part of the invitation. I think that our friend breakup stories are one of the greatest invitations to change for our world. So it's no wonder that we haven't been able to or shown how to listen to them. Because when you allow people to have conflict without shame, eventually they learn how to work together. And so it benefits society for us to feel at a loss in our division with each other, particularly at our grassroots level. Um, so do we want to, there's some questions, Andy, you want to give us? You? Oh, I think you're muted.
Here I am. I've been collecting those from the chat from the beginning. There was a question from M. How do you know where to start if you are experiencing multiple losses at the same time? And I saw that in the chat also, people talking about these multiple losses. Um, how do
Hmm.
you start when the friend is not completely gone, but the relationship dynamic has changed? So those are two
Hmm.
questions. Let's start with the first one.
Hmm. I have an answer for that. Your body. You start with your body. Um, because that's the place that's going to be telling you what you need, to slow down. What are the sensations? What are the things that are coming up for you? And especially if you're alone, how can you find places where you can regularly experience being regulated? Because to have so many overwhelming losses at once, beginning with your own heart, is the best place to be. Um, And so, just as a practical tip, even if you can go to something that's a class or a library reading or a whatever that will be regular and weekly, that will do so much for your nervous system to begin to help you find language again. But when we're overwhelmed, how do we start with the body? I don't know if that answers that with something that's maybe practical and also a little bit of like, where can you begin to think about that?
Gina, do you have anything to add about this issue of experiencing multiple losses concurrently?
You're muted. We can hear you. There
Hello?
you go.
Okay, sorry. I think Kat really had it well because grieving takes endurance and it is a full body experience. I write about that in my book. Something that we don't talk enough about is that it hits all 12 systems of our bodies. So, it's almost like we have to land one plane at a time sometimes, but I like to look at something that's compounded like that as a trauma.
Mm,
Because it is affecting our nervous system and our ability to like function in the world. So I totally agree with her. I don't have too much to add outside of make sure that you take care of your body, drinking enough water, which we forget. When my mom died, I don't know that I was drinking any water. I wound up with pancreatitis and a kidney stone and in the hospital. And getting enough rest, getting fresh air, and making sure that we can look at our boundaries and be able to communicate kind of what our needs are. I think we tend to not want to shake the boat sometimes. But accepting help and support
mm.
wherever we can get it is going to be really helpful too. And being able to really shrink your world a little bit in a way. And if you're really going through it, making sure that you're only giving time and energy outside of whatever other obligations you have to people who are supportive, people who are willing to be there and give to you. And I understand we're talking about a friendship loss group right now. So it's not lost on me. But my hope is that whether it is a support group, a coach of some kind, a spiritual healer, anybody that feels like they're a safe place for you, is going to be the most important thing because when we're grieving and when we're going through a lot, our brains are in survival mode. And we really only go sort of between fight or flight, and I'm really activated and everything is hard to totally shut down. And so I just want to make sure that we kind of live the in between, and we can do that by shrinking our world down a little bit and making sure that we take first good care of our bodies, having boundaries that feel good and safe to us, and then being around safe people who get it. Um, and that's to me like kind of the idea of like we have nothing left to give and we can't pour from an empty cup. It's an adage for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There was a part two to M's question that was echoed
oh,
by Janet. Um, it was about the dynamic of the friendship and how that changes. Um, when you still
Mm-hmm.
have opportunities to interact with that person,
mhm.
and friendship is evolving, that it's not completely over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Want to take that
It's a
one?
it's an awful place to be. Uh, and so what I
Yeah.
want to notice is in that sense, actually, there's an unnamed grief or an unnamed shift usually, and where we don't have naming of things, or someone isn't owning their weird, things can feel just really icky. So if you want to be courageous and risk conflict, you can do that. If the vibes are just off and you don't want to risk it, that's okay too. However, you are confronted with the fact that there has been an ambiguous ending to that relationship, and you now have a new relationship. And regardless, any friendship that's going through a shift on the other side of conflict will have a different relationship. We've lost the friendship we originally had. We're building a new friendship, even if you stay together. So just to
Hmm.
have that identification and container around it, and oh, I do not like being in that place, and I feel you there.
It is. I also feel like, that idea of like, let them, there's so much that we fight for.
Mm-hmm.
We fight for things to be different and we fight for things to be better for ourselves. And we fight for what we hope is better treatment. But at the end of the day, I think that, people are going to do what they're going to do. And we sort of know our place in their life when they do that. And I think that trying to navigate something that's not closed, that feels harder, is really still about taking really good care of yourself and finding ways that validate you and who you are in this life. Because I think that it's so easy to feel invalidated and insecure when you're in that kind of a place. So
Mm-hmm.
it is going to be important to find as much validation as we can. And sometimes that's through unlikely sources, right? I don't know about anyone else, but when I was going through the biggest loss of my life, I lost my mom at 63. Um, she was 63, not me. But the people who showed up for me were not my friends. They were
Mm-hmm.
not able to really be there, and it was really confusing. And it was a choice I had to make. It was always the unlikely people who showed up. Friends of friends, or old colleagues, or strangers from the internet that made me feel the most seen and heard. And so I think that being open to new opportunities and new connections, when we share, is really brave, and it also opens up the possibility for new connections. Because I'll tell you something, I do this work every single day. I work with people going through friendship loss. I also work with people, obviously, in deep, deep grief from loss of a family member, who are feeling abandoned by their friends. Um, or people who lose friends to death because of age, or illness, and no other friends show up. And so I think it's such a common experience that we don't talk enough about. And it's just important to bring that into the light, because shame dies in the light. And I just want, if anything, for people to normalize the idea that our friendships, it can be the most nourishing and nurturing things we have as humans, but also that they can also make us feel the most insecure and the most vulnerable when things go awry. And that does not
Mm-hmm.
define who we are.
Mm-hmm.
So inevitably, finding people who validate and witness us and provide a safe place for us to be is going to be the most important. Um, it's just going to be the most important, because I don't know about you guys, but friends disappoint us in ways in which we somehow can't even anticipate until it
Mm-hmm.
happens.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's what it makes
And
it betrayal. Like, yeah.
yeah, it is a betrayal trauma in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not always to that, incredibly dramatic degree, but ghosting and all of that is really, really painful. The fact that people are still doing that these days, it's just, I understand it's hard to have hard conversations. It's hard when we have rupture, and it's hard to figure out how to repair. And everybody is so tired all the time, and we're so low on energy, and we're spending so much of our time doing other things, that it can be hard to know what to do, because we just don't have it in us.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, and yet we sustain one another.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There was a question
Yeah.
that is specific to the workplace, which I think is an interesting one from Portia. What if a friend is a coworker who betrayed you and has the potential to harm you at work? This person ghosted me, but also is a dangerous person who can create harm.
That's a
I
tough one.
I
That's a tough
will
one.
jump in.
Yeah, you go ahead. You
My
go ahead.
heart is racing hearing your question. How exhausted you must be as you go to work every day. And I wonder what danger has required of you in your history. And I know that doesn't give you a practical tip for right now, but I think that would be a really good question to think about, because I'm imagining that maybe you don't actually get to avoid conflict as a strategy. I mean, I'd have to know you personally, but I'm thinking about how when someone pulls one over on you, it's usually because they've created an enticing space where you trusted them, and then now you realize that they were not for your best good. And I imagine that's not the first time that's happened to you in the context of the story of your life. And so I wonder if you could go back and notice what you believe when you're in a dangerous situation or you've been betrayed, that it is going to require of you or cost you, because likely, I'm not saying this person can't harm you, but hang on one sec. I want to say this real succinctly. People are very interested in holding the idea that they can do more harm to you than they may actually be willing to do. And just the haunting of it in and of itself is enough for you to pull yourself back from action you might take in your favor, if that makes sense. So some reflection on what danger has cost you in your past, and maybe ways that you would maybe choose to shrink that maybe you actually don't need to. um, I don't know if that makes sense, but that is a tough place to be.
So it's not only painful because now you're dealing with friendship loss, but where you give the most energy and effort and care and your livelihood is involved,
Mm-hmm.
that makes it something that feels untenable for very long. And I'm also hoping that there's somebody within your workplace that feels safe that you can talk to about this.
Yeah,
Because
you
you
need a
can't be
witness.
living like this. It's not, you're in fight or flight, I imagine, pretty much living on edge. I'm imagining, you can tell me if I'm wrong, of course. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it's hard. I mean, all of it is hard anyway. Losing the friendship is hard, and then there's always these other ripple effects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you need a witness. And if you don't have one, we can, this is from a professor of mine, but we can bear a need that is validated, even if that need is not met. That's from someone who studies chronic shame by the name of Steve Call. So you need a witness at work, and whether you have one or don't, validating that. Yeah.
Oh, it's academia. I just saw.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That'll
Mm-hmm.
do it.
Gina and Kat, I have a question from Jacqueline that I collected from the chat. What's good
Okay.
Yeah.
way to stop ruminating over the hurt
Mm.
a person has caused, especially when you're having a bad day?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, personally, I think the idea of the letter writing will help with that. I think that when we're ruminating, we're trying to find another path. It's like the idea of magical thinking. Like I can change the ending or I can figure out how to make sense of this in a different way. I don't think that that helps. Obviously, you're hurting even more. But I do think that the idea of creating multifaceted letters of all of the things that you're angry about, all of the things you're confused about, all of the things that you wish were different, all the things that are painful for you, and sometimes all of the things that have been done that trigger something from our past that now comes back up again and reminds us, or doubles that sense of loss, which we didn't talk about today, but when this type of thing happens, how it can trigger other moments that this has happened, right? That's why I call it a trauma. There's an imprint that if we're ruminating on something that it's stuck in there and it's replaying again and again. And my thought is probably this isn't the first time a theme like that has happened, depending on what it is. And my idea is really getting it out of your body and getting it out of your head over and over again for a little while in this form of letter writing, and or journaling. And Kat had mentioned it earlier. Longhand is going to be the most important because it is evidence-based practice that writing things down with our hand in terms of interactive journaling is an incredibly powerful therapeutic tool. Many people poo-poo the idea of writing and journaling, but it is incredibly powerful when we do it. And I think we have some of that witnessed here. But I would say that the rumination, number one, is going to be writing it as much as you can. And also, I think it's also important to talk about it with people who care. I don't know if you have a therapist or a coach or there's other friends that you trust that you can talk to about this, but I think that the most important thing is getting out all of the fears, all of the feelings, and because we can't grieve if we're still trying to replay the scenario again and again. And we want to get it to a place where we can actually grieve
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because
I
making sense of it is going to be painful.
mm-hmm. And I think we talk about rumination, transforming it into compassionate self-inquiry, and what haunts you is historical, always. So if there's something that is just picking at you and it won't go away, you can't, it won't leave, then can you listen? Can you find a safe enough way to listen? And that's where, I mean, practically speaking, the angle of my book is related to the historical hauntings of our friend breakups, and how every friend breakup that we've been through is actually a doorway to a place in our past that is asking us to listen. Which fun fact, since this is about the holidays, the last chapter I forgot. It's about It's a Wonderful Life, which is a Christmas movie. So, anyways, just plugging that right there. I didn't realize I was on
Yeah,
theme.
Gina,
I love that.
You had mentioned trauma, and there is another question related to that from RT. Um, what should you do to help others experience less harm or trauma if you accidentally ghost people you love and you do that all the time, being just who you are? Like if smartphone use isn't your thing. RT says they were blindsided a few times by heartbroken loved ones, thought they were giving them the silent treatment. And RT feels terrible. Any thoughts on that?
I think that this is going to be sort of a simple answer, which is how do you show up? How do you show up when you are showing up, right? Do you show up? We all show up better in some ways, right? Some of us show up better in person. Some of us show up better over the phone. Some of us are better texters. Sometimes we're none of the above until because we're dealing with so many different things. But I think that the truth is, it's a lot like what I say when we're looking for people to support us, is just be there and be honest. And so I think that when people really matter to us, the idea to say, I'm going to try to do better, but I'm not so good at this, but I care so much about you and this friendship. And I would like to try to find a way for us to connect or for you to feel loved by me um, in the ways that I can do this. And I think that it is really important because we all have different ways of communicating best. Sometimes it's a meet in the middle sort of thing where your friend may say, but I'm always the one reaching out to you. Can you meet me halfway? And I think in that case, it's what can we do better sometimes too? And how can we communicate the ways in which we're able to show up for somebody and have them hear it so that they know, okay, well, I'm not going to hear from, I think it's RT that you mentioned. Sorry if I don't have your initials correct. But how can I show up for them and do a little bit more in a way that is making them feel like they're loved, but also if they know that I love them and I'm really crap at calling people back, or I'm really just like messy at communication when it's, if it's got to be often, that this is the way I can communicate. And please know that I love you. And I think that that's really the only thing we can really ask for is how do we show up in an honest and authentic way? We have all pretty busy lives. Time moves quickly. For whatever it's worth, even if we're not busy, time just seems to go quickly. And I think it's important to be able to just be honest and say, I don't know where the days go, but of course I love you and of course I care. And and this is how this is what I'd like to do. Maybe once a month we meet for coffee, or once a month we have a phone call and we put it in the calendar, or I write you a postcard or something like that, and I put it in the mailbox if that's my preferred way of communicating. But most of all, even in the silence, through space and time, however far apart you may be or not, um, I care and I'm here and you are valuable to me. And I think that we don't say that enough to people. I think sometimes we assume that other people care about us, but I'm really big on like making sure that I can communicate it because when I fall short or when I am sick, like I have been with pneumonia in the past 2 weeks, and I don't show up, I know that people won't automatically assume that I don't care or that I'm blowing them off. And I think that it's hard sometimes to communicate our love and our care when we have been hurt too. But I think that the simple answer for me is you do what you can do, but communicate what you can do, and also communicate the reiteration of care and value in this. And I think it's just important to
Mm.
do that because I think that impact versus intention remains something that we all care about, right? Like we intend to say hello to somebody, but when we when we don't do it in a way that they feel is a loving hello, the impact can feel like it's a miss. And I think that happens a lot with friendships. And so it's really getting on the same page with what our intentions are and how that impacts somebody at the same time, because nobody means any harm. Nobody means any harm, at least in this group. I'm assuming I feel like I know your hearts and I'm just looking at your faces. But you're here with us, so that has to mean something. But I think it's really hard, and I think the expectations are really hard too. People have different expectations based on where they are in their life and in the world and even during the week. I have a lot more patience when I don't have pneumonia, and so I think it's a matter of just really knowing where people are and how we can show up for them. Sorry for that country road answer. I really took the country road on that one.
Mhm. Lovely.
Maybe one more question, and then we have to wrap up. Another question from M. How do we balance the grieving and not getting lost in it with just living our lives, especially in times when things are really heavy?
There was an exhibition at the MoMA I saw years and years ago of all these sculptures that were oddly shaped that balanced, and none of them were even on one side or the other. So I offer you that is how do we balance and how do you make more room for the weight of grief on one side and what that will mean for you.
I like that a lot. I think that, we're always grieving something. I think that we forget that non-death losses happen all the time too. And when we're grieving though, and we're actively grieving or actively in grief, it's an exhausting, absolutely exhausting in every way experience. And I think having as much compassion as we can possibly have for ourselves, and that means accepting the hard days. And sometimes just taking a shower and getting out of bed has to be enough. And then on the days that we can do more, we celebrate those days we can do more. And eventually you'll start having more and more of those, minus the holidays, days of meaning, and birthdays and anniversaries, probably. However, outside of that, I think that it's an idea, I talk a lot about the expectations in grief because I think that there's so much coming from society and we have so many, it's like society taps its little watch and now it's time to stop grieving and get right back to life. But the truth is that grief will be with us. It'll be with us in the gratitude. It will be with us in the life events and the milestones. It will be with us as the years go on and it lives side by side. It's little companion to life. And I think that the more that we can understand that we don't have to get rid of grief or get over grief, but rather grief comes with us and life comes with us too, a little at a time. I think that we can have a lot more grace for the experience of let me just be grateful for the days it feels good and the people who show up. And I
Mm,
think that that sometimes has to be enough because it's really
mm,
hard.
mhm,
And you guys
mhm.
have all shown up here today. So I really thank you. This is a hard topic. It's a painful topic. Um, oh, Casey just said moving. I just lost it, but I wrote a book called Moving On Doesn't Mean Letting Go. And I meant it for the ways in which we carry grief with us. So many people keep saying you've got to move on, whether it's friendship loss or any other kind of loss, but it doesn't mean that we're letting go. There's a lot that we carry with us. And so it's just the tenderness that we can come forward with our own grief for. So, personally, I wish all of you here a very tender and gentle holiday season, and
Mhm,
beyond. And, life gets harder and harder sometimes. It's just a reminder to be as compassionate as you can with yourselves moving forward. But I'm grateful to be here with you. And I would love it if you kept in touch with me in some capacity. So thank you all for showing up, and thank you, Kat and Andy and Trina
mhm,
and Reimagine for having us here to talk about this. It's to me, one of the most important things is just the idea of togetherness and being in this together. Even if you don't
mm,
talk, it's the energy that we all show up here with. So I really appreciate that.
mm.
Thank you, Gina.
Um,
Before we go, I want some last words from Kat, who has offered to close us out with a poem. So thank you for that.
yes. Yeah, thanks. I was like, can I read you all a poem? This goes into the practicality of friendship and friend breakups in that we don't know how to end well. We don't have any examples of it, and normally our endings are another form of trauma. So this is a style of a blessing, which sometimes can be a triggering word, but it's a way of seeing what we have been through and what could be. And I have these little friend breakup survival guides, and they're different categories. And this one has been one that people have come back to again and again for living without closure. So, this is a blessing for when a friend disappears, and it feels connected to what we've sat with today. A blessing for when a friend disappears. When the time elapses and the space between you widens, and your heart is marked from stretching to hold the silence. May you love within you what longs for a different ending and wishes there were words to wrestle with instead of implications. May you let your mind wander and tenderly walk yourself back from the edge. Slowly, your wondering will remember beauty, and your imagination will prompt new ways of belonging, where conversation is shared and the quiet once again holds the hushed reverence of love.
Thank you, Kat. Thank
Beautiful.
you, Trina. Thank you, Trina.
So beautiful.
Reimagine, who's helped out on this call. Thanks to all of you for showing up, for being here. I loved the support you gave each other in the chat. Once again, thanks to those who donated to Reimagine when you registered. There's still an opportunity to support Reimagine by the end of the year. We'd love that. And please, this is most important. Trina is going to paste in the chat now a survey. This helps us tremendously in developing our programs and our events. We want to hear from you what worked, what didn't. If you have other ideas, we'd love to hear from you. So please fill that out. You'll get the follow-up email with resources and links for both Gina and Kat. So thanks, everyone. And I wish you all peaceful and restful holidays. And we hope to see you soon at other Reimagine events. Take good care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you again for coming.
Bye. Thank you.